All right, thank you so much for joining today's webinar with Mintigo, Genesys, and Forrester. My name is Erin Peterson, and I'm the VP of Customer Experience at Mintigo, and I'm delighted to have you here. As I mentioned, I'm joined by our longtime and very adored customer Genesys and analyst friends from Forrester to discuss transforming to account-based demand by aligning people, data, and technologies. To set the stage for those newer to the conversation, Mintigo is a B2B account-based intelligence platform that helps marketing and sales teams identify buyers that are more likely to convert. We've deployed the industry's most sophisticated AI technology to gather insights and track intent data to understand the DNA of your ideal customers and expose where they are in the buyer's journey. Genesys is a leader for omni-channel customer experience and contact center solutions, trusted by more than 10,000 companies in over 100 countries worldwide. They've been a Mintigo customer for many years, leveraging predictive models and intent data to support their sales and marketing teams. Genesys was recently recognized by SiriusDecisions, who were acquired in late 2018 by Forrester Research, one of the most influential research and advisory firms in the world, as the 2019 ROI Award winner for sales, marketing, and product alignment for their comprehensive work in shifting to an account-based demand approach, which we're really excited to walk you through together today. To give a little context on how we ended up here, I'd love to give each of our speakers a chance to introduce themselves. Hector?
Good morning, everyone. So Hector Vizcarrondo, I've worked for Genesys in the last 4 years, working directly with Mintigo, developing models through their platform, leveraging their intelligence to create frameworks and improve performance across channels in marketing. And I will explain later how have we used Mintigo in developing the demand unit waterfall and changing our approach from a lead-based model to an account-based model.
Thanks, Hector. And Allison?
Thank you, Erin. This is Allison Snow from Forrester. Thank you so much for having me, Erin. I'm an analyst here at Forrester. I've been here 3 years, and my coverage area is marketing analytics, customer analytics, essentially arming B2B firms with understanding and employing the trends and patterns in their data that lend themselves to actions that create customer value. Thank you.
Yeah, so happy to have you both here. This is going to be a really great hour. So for today, Allison's first going to walk us through what Forrester is seeing regarding trends in analytics and specifically insights, revenue growth, and behavioral data. After that, Hector will take over and share some of the specifics of why Genesys adopted the demand unit waterfall, how they managed that transformation, and then go into their use of intent and behavioral data, predictive scoring, prioritized demand, and the impact this has had on their business. And just a few quick matters of housekeeping. The slides and a recording will be shared after today's webinar. We also welcome you to submit questions throughout the session. And if there is anything specific about a company or a speaker, please just note that so we can ask it of the right person on your behalf. We'll get to as many as we have time for and then follow up on any others afterward. With that, I'm delighted to hand it off to Allison.
Thanks, everybody. So again, I want to echo Erin's gratitude. Thank you for joining us. So my role today is fairly introductory. I do want to jump into some trends that I'm seeing, and I'm really enthusiastic about how well they complement this theme of alignment and the reward that Genesys received from SiriusDecisions and the other topics that we'll talk about today. So from an agenda standpoint, I would like to touch upon those trends. I'll tell you what they are now. This is them. The acknowledgement of analytics dependencies for success. I call this acknowledgement of the life cycle. So we'll dig into that. And that's something that's really changing as folks kind of learn lessons from their earlier pursuits in analytics and insights and applying them to action. We'll talk about the coxswain, which if some of you aren't familiar with that term, it's basically the person in charge of a boat that manages navigation and steering. You typically see that person in rowing. That person who's kind of yelling at everybody and keeping them going in the same direction. So I want to talk about how firms are applying analytics for revenue growth and playing the role of the coxswain. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the role of behavioral data things like intent data, things like what prospects and customers are doing to indicate and provide signals of intent to do any number of things. I refer to this as the Swiss Army knife because really that data has such broad capabilities of applicability, not just the way we've used them in the past for things like net new account lists and prioritization schemas, but so much more than that. And as folks become aware of that, it's really, really powerful and helps personalize context. So I'm really excited to talk through those things. The trend here, I think, the trend of these trends is really that it does double down on the theme of alignment and specifically of people, data, and tech. So we're really having a conversation about mindset change here, which I think is the way that we should do it. So we'll be seeing these symbols throughout the presentation. So when it comes to the life cycle, there's really 4 key phases of the insights and analytics lifecycle. There's the establishment of goals, the understanding of which data are required to fulfill that goal, the insights and analytics that come from the analytical techniques and the data, and the action. And it's really the right order: goal, data, action, goal, data, insights to action, really. And so it looks pretty simple, right? It looks pretty obvious. But when you think about the movement from goal to action, what's really happening is we have this opportunity at the goal portion that not enough of us are taking, to think really hard about business objectives, mapping and aligning to those objectives, and getting as granular as possible, right? To be able to understand the story that we want to tell at the other end of an analytics initiative at the beginning. And so this is a key one. As well as data, of course, what do you have access to? What are the gaps? And then analytics, needless to say. But we do have to point out here that analytics is just really one piece of this life cycle, not just, it's not the entire life cycle, it's really that one piece. And then the action piece becomes so important as well. It's a commitment to the organization that's more than just providing insights. It is the commitment that will work toward actionable insights, that the action will recommend can make them impactful. And it's just bigger than algorithms, and it becomes strategy. So what happens here, again, just to make this really clear, we're generally pretty good, or historically we've been pretty good about the data and analytics piece. Even if we don't have all the data available for a certain project, the discipline there is quite good, but the discipline kind of falls off where it has historically for things like really aligning to goals, having a real prioritization methodology that aligns to the business, so that, again, we're telling those stories at the end of the day that we want to tell. And we also seem to fall off, a lot of times classically at the action piece. So a lot of times we'll end up with a lot of insights into our target market, or insights into what folks are doing on the web, what our prospects are interested in, but still find it hard to move the levers of change on the other side, to adapt to those insights, to take action on those insights. So these are the 2 pieces that trend-wise folks are becoming more and more aware of. And that action really, the way that the action comes to life is encouraging or preventing something that you want to happen. So again, going back to that piece around goals, we really need to understand what we want to encourage or what we want to prevent. So it's easy to say we want to encourage more revenue, and it's easy to say we want to prevent churn. But what we really have to do with analytics is understand the indicators of likelihood to do any number of things: to buy, to respond, convert, engage, churn, unsubscribe, and all of those things. Understand the desirable and the undesirable actions and how they are leading indicators to other things. So the point here is to link to these things to apply insights for value, not just to kind of know things. And this isn't easy. People need to really understand change management to get their head around this change. So I offer a very simple model to think about that. And this simple model is the customer obsessed operating model that Forrester published, frankly, a number of years ago. And it really just has 6 levers. And in my opinion, the recipe for change always has these 6 ingredients. So here they are on the slide: structure, culture, talent, metrics, processes, and technology. So we just looked through the analytics lifecycle and saw that analytics was just one piece of the analytics lifecycle. And I think as we consider any technology project, whether that's installing an analytics platform or what have you, we really have to think of the tech as just one piece of a change management structure in this context. So these elements that we just read are all dependent on each other and they work harmoniously. So think about the balance here. For instance, my talent should reflect my metrics, right? That's kind of an easy one. I need people to know how to do the things I want to get done. My processes should reflect my metrics, and new processes will call for culture change. So I don't want to beat that too much, but I think you get the idea that these things, again, have to work harmoniously. A change to one of them really has to have some responsive changes in the other. And when it comes to analytics in particular, new insights really change the game in enormous ways. So we need to ask ourselves, if we invest in the element of tech, what does it mean for these other elements? And if we don't, we really get pretty out of whack, right? So again, I mentioned that the themes I wanted to talk about were so well in line with the concept of alignment. And this is why. This is what it looks like to really be out of whack. This is why alignment is not a buzzword. Alignment is still the key to success. If we invest in something like a tech solution or an analytics solution in our case, we're really only addressing one element of change. The other elements would therefore shrink in context. And that effect, if we do that, is that we're over-rotating on only one element. So it manifests itself in many ways, more than I can go into today, but one key way is that we'll have insights that we don't know what to do with, right? We'll learn something about our target market that we can't quite action. We can't quite build responses to it because we haven't really set up those processes to do so in response to something that we learned. We don't have the processes to accommodate those things. We don't have cultures of testing, for instance, to support hypotheses that we'll get with analytics and insights. So this is just kind of the visual I want you to have in mind when we think alignment and what lack of alignment looks like. So trend-wise, companies are becoming very in tune to this because they want their tech investments to pay off. And it's become clear over the course of time as we invest in all sorts of technologies as businesses, that these are really the requirements for getting it right. And analytics is no exception. The next trend I'm seeing is the application of analytics to marketing and sales and executive alignment. So this is still, even though I won't show you those graphics again, this is still dependent on those elements staying in balance. But it can work because analytics applied to revenue growth can connect sales and marketing execs by infusing analytics to do all of the wonderful things that we want to do, right? That those things that we agree on, building demand, cultivating and market accounts, supporting active deals, promoting account renewal, enrichment, preventing churn, all of those great things, encouraging advocacy. So it can really be the puzzle piece that addresses some of the classic blockers of sales and marketing alignment. So classically, we see separate outcomes, separate ideas of what makes good value for the company, separate ideas of what long-term value looks like, what are the attributes of long-term value, separate incentives, separate perceptions of drivers of value. So analytics can address all of this if we keep those elements of the operating model operating in balance. And so here are some examples to bring that to life. When we think about going to market intelligently to achieve efficient long-term growth, we have to think about the supporting analytics behind that. And I would say that those are things like total addressable market and ideal client profile. Once those things are established, if they're truly established, if they're established with analytical rigor, marketing is less likely to qualify, so to speak, or prioritize ill-fit accounts. And sales, on the other hand, is less likely to pursue business that's unlikely to close or be profitable or be retained. When it comes to revenue optimized journeys and targeting intelligently, we think about predictive marketing analytics, elements powered by machine learning and AI that consume historical conversion data as well as other data, firmographics and technographics and more, and some of the behavioral data that we'll talk about later, and really start to understand, again, with analytical rigor, what are those drivers of value? What are the attributes of firms that become high value, of firms that close with us and stay with us and retain, so that we can stop having conversations where we disagree about what value looks like and start to really tune into and double down on the levers that indicate true value. When it comes to maximizing lifetime value, what we're talking about here is CLV as a separate analytical stream in and of itself, but also using things like predictive marketing analytics to really understand and drive more value from those high value customers. So that becomes important as well. Not only boosting margins, but boosting margins in the right places for profitability and growth. And finally, of course, using analytics to prevent churn existing revenue streams. A lot of times, marketing and sales are both, one thing we have in common is we're both really, really concerned with the pre-purchase experience, while most of our customers care a whole lot more about what's happening after they signed a contract. So we kind of have to turn to analytics to also get our stories straight there. Certainly we want to prevent churn, but we also want to do it for our most highly prioritized existing customers. We want to apply cross-sell and upsell analysis to increase revenue per customer and customer experience. So we need to turn to analytics to do that. And these are just some examples trend-wise of where I see people using analytics to go ahead and stop the gut-based, anecdote-based conversations that they're having between sales and marketing and turn to analytics to make those conversations a bit more real. And finally, what I'm calling the Swiss Army knife, which is basically behavioral data and the applications behind it that are becoming more and more broad. Right? Marketers just not only examining, but interpreting behavioral data in ways that they haven't before. So they're broadening their understanding of what behaviors exist and what they might mean and the role they might play in signaling intent to do any number of things. Intent to convert, intent to buy, intent to churn, intent to advocate, all of those things. So I present this slide to you as a number of very broad ways to think about behavioral data. I know that typically we hear things like intent data and we think about content consumption from third-party sites. But that's a single source and it should be considered in the context of a wider propensity analysis that considers all of this, possible with an analytical tool that distills a lot of this for you, like Minigo. So these are just some broad ways to think about what behavioral data looks like, all of it contributing to a greater propensity analysis. And then thinking about how it can be applied. So I'll dig into just 2 or 3 of those here on the slide to say more about it. When it comes to understanding the types of things that folks are doing and the types of content that they're consuming by individual account, whether they're high priority target accounts or even by segments, thinking about how that informs editorial planning can be really, really insightful. To be thinking about not only what content is consumed, but what stage of the buy cycle is it consumed at based on our analytics? What are the segments that consume it? Is there certain content that is present in the buy cycle of certain segments? And what does that mean for our editorial planning? It puts a nice strategic layer on top of that plan for blogging and white papers and guest writing of any sort. Certainly providing insights to sales to escalate the one-on-one dialogue. I believe that it's our role as marketers as we transition out of qualifying leads and sending them over to sales in this account-based world and rising up to become the provider of insights, that it's part of our role to say, what are people exploring and how are they behaving? And what does that mean for how I educate sales? What does that mean for how I prep them for deep, engaging dialogue when it comes time to talk one-on-one, not only digitally? And finally, just creating better audiences. I'll take this one because I think this is also the next important one. Thinking about when we design campaigns and how do we do it now? We typically think about our value proposition and what we want to say, and then go to our database and figure out to whom we want to say it. But understanding the behavior of our target audience, understanding what they're consuming for content on our own site and other sites, really helps us to understand what we should be saying in the first place, how we complement our own value proposition with the right messages and even the right tone. So just some ways to think about behavioral data differently and things that I've been seeing trend-wise. So at this point, I want to just go ahead and say thank you and give this back to Erin. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Allison. I really appreciate it. I feel like, so much of what you've done for us is to actually take this from the philosophical down to the practical. And I'm really excited for Hector to share how this has been deployed at Genesys in production. So Hector, we'll hand it to you.
So thank you very much, Erin and Mentigo, for the opportunity to talk and explain what we have built. I first wanted to kind of um, provide you with an overview of our company. Some people don't really know Genesys too much. So as Erin mentioned, we are the world's largest contact center software provider with 11,000 customers and in more than 100 countries, with over 25 billion interactions every year through omni-channel experiences that leverage AI. We serve over 70% of the Fortune 500 companies, including great brands like Costco and UPS and some others. And traditionally we have focused on enterprise companies, but in recent years we have expanded to the mid-market and small business segments. With our cloud product, Pure Cloud, experiencing a very high growth of 135% compounded annual growth rate. So to enable this growth, in the last year, marketing has evolved in the way we operate. Similar to other B2B marketing organizations, we used to run programs and track performance at the lead level, which presented some challenges in terms of driving actionable insights and driving performance. It also presented misalignment between sales and marketing around what was the marketing opportunity, and misalignment around segment and region level capacity planning. For that reason, in the last year, we started a project to move our organization to an ABM model, where we leverage the demand unit waterfall framework from SiriusDecisions in order to rationalize account stages in the sales cycle. So for people that are not familiar with the demand unit waterfall, you see that chart on the right side. Essentially, target demand is the list of all companies that are interested in your product or has a need for your product, and technically this is a portion of the target addressable market. And in our case, we call this target demand based on the demand unit waterfall stages. Then active demand is the group of accounts that within that target addressable market that are showing some early signals of interest in your product. When they go into Google and they search for contact center software, we are able to track those accounts and those intent signals to identify if there's some accounts that we can start to engage early on. Then we get to engage demand, which is essentially cases where companies are engaging with you, with your company, either through events, your website, or other channels. And then qualify demand, prioritize demand. These are stages where we're using our data, we're using behavioral scoring, we're using predictive analytics to determine which accounts are more likely to convert and progress across this funnel, across this demand waterfall funnel. And then pipeline and close is more similar to what we've had in the past, where we're looking at opportunities with pipeline and then what percentage of those closed and becomes a one deal. So these are the basics. So one of the first things we did when we embarked in this project of going from a lead-based model to an ABM model and building the demand unit waterfall was to understand, how are we in terms of our tech stack, like what technologies we had that we were not really using, what technologies we needed in order to build that demand unit waterfall. And then in some cases, we put together some evaluations to test the performance. In the case of intent, we went thoroughly through the evaluation of different vendors to understand which ones were the ones that performed the best. So it was a long process, as you can imagine. We replaced 25% of our tech stack in that process in the last year. And Mentigo is one of our technologies that we use across different stages. So we use them for target demand, for active demand, engage demand, and prioritize demand. And I'll go through the details on how we got to that. In the process of defining the demand unit waterfall, one of the key areas was to define the TAM, or the targeted addressable market. bringing in data from different places using AI and technographics from different platforms. And in this process, we build our TAM using 3 platforms. So we use Mintigo, we use Smart E, and we use HE data. So using their AI technographics, the Mintigo MIs, to determine which accounts had some existing technology associated to what we sell, it allows us to understand out of the whole world of companies in different regions, how many of those are actually, have an interest in our technology. So we use 3 sources, and then we also use data from our CRM, understanding companies that may have had some pipeline in our systems before. So we merge all that data together, and then we use a tool called Dedupe.io in order to remove the duplicates and to have a set that was consistent and was clean up. So we ended up at a very good place where we ended up at 80%, based on our market research, about 80% of our target total addressable market. It was a little uneven depending on the regions. Obviously, regions like APAC and LATAM, we didn't have enough coverage, but we feel really confident about this TAM. We also work with teams in other regions to improve what we already built. So in some cases, we added some new accounts in some sub-regions. And this we thought was a first good starting point, because when we compare to other companies doing the same exercise, it took them about 2 years to get to that 80% coverage of the markets of the total addressable market. So we felt really confident about this process, and this is kind of the first building block in that creation of the demand waterfall. Now the second piece is creating a concept of active demand. So using that intent, those intent signals to define what that active demand is. And first part intent is essentially what we are looking at here is anonymous traffic, looking at all of the anonymous signals that we had for a specific account. And we looked at many vendors and we evaluated them based on the percentage of accounts that they were able to match based on IP matching. So we went with a vendor that provided us the highest matching, and that was about 40%. Then second part intent is we've been working with review sites like G2 Crowd, Trust Radius, and we have data feeds that allows us to know which accounts are actually looking at our content in the review sites or our competitors' content. So that is also a big source for our active demand, looking at what activity are we seeing in those review sites. And lastly, third-party intent. This is something that we have worked with in the past, where Mintigo provided some of those insights a while back when we started with them about 3 years ago. And some of this is we were aware already that this data is a bit noisy, but there's some good value out of this, and we wanted to test different vendors. We connected with SiriusDecisions. They provided some recommendations, but we tested 8 different vendors with different sourcing. Some of them source their intent data through advertising exchanges. Some of them source them through publishers. And we wanted to make sense of this, and what we did is we provided a sample of accounts across different segments, across different regions, and across different stages. Some of them may have been at the pipeline level stage. Some of them might have been early on in the buying cycle. And we wanted to test that against the signals that we got from the different vendors and against the internal activity that we saw on our website to see if there was some correlation between what we were seeing and what the vendors were providing in terms of intent signals. So we went through this and we identified that Mintigo was one of the key, one of the platforms that provided the most coverage and the most correlation with our internal activities. And also, it allows us to understand the relationship between core and non-core intent signals. So obviously, I mean, you could look at 100 topics associated to what we sell, but there could be 2 or 3 that are really 100% correlated with what we sell. And you need to make a distinction between those 2 different tiers, because they could drive higher or lower conversions, and it is important you make that distinction. So in terms of defining active demand, after we decided on which vendors to use for both for first party intent, second party intent, and third party intent, we define a scoring approach where anything that came in through first party intent or second party intent would qualify. Any account that had some of those signals would qualify as active demand. And then for third party intent, if there was a core signal showing up for an account, then we would qualify that as active demand. But then if there were at least 4 non-core signals from third-party intent, we'd qualify that as active demand as well. So this is the way we approach the usage of intent, leveraging Mintigo, and how we define active demand in the demand waterfall framework. So that was on active demand. Then, historically we've been using Mintigo for many use cases, looking at accounts and understanding which accounts have the higher likelihood of conversion. And for that, we have built, I believe, 7 models across regions, across segments, at the account level to understand, which accounts are more likely to convert. And we're using that to, in the past, we have used it to target specific accounts with different campaigns. Now we're moving with the demand waterfall. We're moving to a place where we're automating campaigns, always on, using, the technographics, the infographics from accounts, looking at, the ICP, the Mintigo rank, and the segmentation from Mintigo, as well as other technographic information. But also the demand waterfall. So one thing is to identify if an account is more likely to convert, but you also need to look at what stage they're in the demand waterfall. So we've been implementing automated campaigns through Terminus, using that information, that intelligence, and that has proven to be very effective. In terms of lead scoring, this is something that we have built. We have built and optimized through the years, and we have seen really great results. And you'll see on the next slide. We initially went in with a framework that combined predictive analytics and behavior scoring. So we have a very robust behavior scoring where we use multi-touch attribution to determine what should be the score for each activity. But we also merge that with predictive analytics, and it has proven to be very effective. So the way we approach the usage of predictive analytics is we try to be as granular as we can. Obviously, there's sometimes you don't have enough sample for going with 20 segments or maybe 50 segments. So I think right now we have 12 models in place. And what we try to do here is we looked at behaviors that were similar across segments, across regions, and then we aggregated those populations and created different models that may have had different or have different MIs that are more relevant for that specific market. But in that process, we have optimized this. Every 6 months we have a review, and we look at what is the conversion lift for these models. And in this case, you can see that this is just an example of, I think this is North America, where we get about 4x in terms of conversion lift. And the next stage on this is we've been looking at, what's the next step on this. And the next step is really to incorporate not only the Mintigo MIs, but also behavioral data and first party, third party intent, and SDR tasks. So this is sales development reps tasks that are logged in the system. And the idea is to have a logistics regression model that captures all of this information and decides on, which accounts are more likely to convert. And at some point, we're going to be moving into replacing our MQA logic by using this 360 scoring model. And what we're seeing right now, we've been working with Mentigo. They have been really helpful in helping us build these models. Is we're getting into a 5x conversion lift for about 15% of all the accounts in tab. I would say in general, the Mentigo platform is very easy to use, even if you're not a data scientist. And I think in the initial stages, we were in a situation where we were building models, and then we connected with the team, and they help us optimize the models, which was really helpful into driving performance. So this is where we went in and we said, okay, so we already have set up a very robust lead-based scoring, a very robust lead-based model. So how do we merge this demanding waterfall with what we have in place? And what we said is, let's look at the prioritization. It's critical that SDRs not only look at hot leads the way we have them today, but we also look at, based on our scoring, which accounts are qualified accounts that also have MQLs. So that's kind of the first two levels of priorities that SDRs have to look after when they're looking at, who to contact first. So accounts with hot leads, then MQAs with MQLs. The third level is MQAs based on our scoring, and then MEAs with MQLs, and then MEAs, and then if there's enough capacity, maybe go after active intent. It could be different in terms of the capacity depending on the subregion you're in. And then we created dashboards in Salesforce that allows us to look at these different priorities for SDRs to follow up on these accounts. One thing that is really critical is to understand where we are in the demand waterfall. For that, we created dashboards. One is called a scorecard, which is what you see on the left, where you can see where are accounts in the demand waterfall by segment, by region, by sub-region, to get a sense and diagnose if there's too many accounts in a specific stage, if there's an opportunity for you to run specific campaigns in the middle of the funnel, at the top of the funnel, or at the bottom of the funnel. And then on the right side, you see a screenshot of a new dashboard that we have built, where what we're doing there is we're looking at all the accounts that enter a specific stage in the demand waterfall, and then looking at in the last 90 days, what percentage of those progress to the next stage or any stage after that. So it give you a good perspective as to how many accounts are you progressing from one stage to another one, but it also allows you to drill down into which channels influence those accounts after they enter that stage, and what percentage of them progress. So it tells you which channels are performing better. So if you're looking at MEAs and they progressed, let's say 10% of MEAs progressed in the last 90 days, then you can see that maybe paid search review sites are progressing accounts at 20, 30% rates, which is higher than your baseline. So therefore, those are really helping out in progressing those accounts. So it could be different depending on the stage, but it really help you understand what's driving performance and progression. We are also able to drill down into what specific campaigns from Salesforce are helping you progress. And it's also helping you, determine what campaigns should we continue and what campaigns should we take out. But it's not only about progression and the demand waterfall, it's also about ROI, like what kind of financial performance are we getting out of these campaigns. And for that, we have built a dashboard, or an ROI dashboard, that looks at all of the value that we're driving in terms of multi-touch attribution for specific channel, for a specific campaign, and tying those to expenses, and being able to show those in a Tableau dashboard to be able to see and make decisions, in different stages of the process. So all of this is really difficult to do, as you can imagine. So one of the key things that we built internally is we host all of this data in a big data platform. And this allows us to not only make the calculations of specific metrics, KPIs, and merge data from different places like CRM, marketing automation, and web data, but it also allows us to use AI to make decisions. So this, in the case of the Mintigo 360 model, all of that data we're hosting in our big data platform, and this has been moved into the Mintigo platform for them to run their models, and then it comes back to our cloud data warehouse, where we then expose that data into our business decision layer or our BI layer. So it's a complex implementation, but I think we have worked together pretty well, and we're starting to see the results of that partnership. So after we implemented this, we have seen really great results so far. 16% increase in terms of pipeline, 30% increase in terms of bookings, and specifically for the mid-market, where we said, this is a segment that we have been has been a focus for us in the last 2 years. We have increased our share of the bookings by 26%. So some of the lessons learned from this project are: do not disrupt your current setup. So I just showed you that we already have built this very strong lead scoring model. And the way we approach it is we created this new account-based model, but at the same time, we're incorporating some of the insights that we got from our current setup or old setup. So also get feedback from all teams. There's ideas, all ideas are good. You just need to understand how does it applies to what you have in place, and try to use data, always, because it always clarifies what works, what doesn't work. Use predictive analytics if you need to. We've been using it for many use cases, not only for lead scoring, account scoring, but also for churn and cross-sell. Then have a framework to track how well your rules perform over time and adjust continually. So this is something that we're doing right now, looking at our current definitions of MQAs, our current definitions of marketing engaged accounts, marketing qualified accounts, our active demand as well, looking at those intent signals. Are they helping us get to accounts that are really converting and progressing, or is there something that we need to change? So this is something that we're continually doing, and we're in that process. And then lastly, third-party intent data is very noisy. So you need to have a good scoring framework and understand what are the differences between vendors that provide data from advertising exchanges, vendors that provide data from publishers, understand the difference between core and non-core signals. And also, I think it's also critical to understand how can you leverage first-party intent and as well as second-party intent. So I think this is it for me. I'm going to pass it to Erin, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. So let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and pop up the Q&A. All right, perfect. So what I'd like to actually start with is a question for you, Hector, just sort of following up on this, is how much time did it take to go from implementation to seeing ROI? I know you've been on a journey with a lot of different chapters of deployment, but maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of what you experienced and what you would suggest others should expect.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, like the first step in this process was working on TAM, and we started that process back in July last year. And I think from that place until we actually use the demand waterfall we action it. I think in February was when we first ran some Terminus campaigns using the demand waterfall insights. So it's about 6-7 months, the time it takes to get there. Obviously, some of this is happening right now. So some of this, the SDRs then got some insights in March, but we're starting to see an uptick on pipeline, an uptick on bookings, and an uptick on the number of accounts that are progressing from active demand to either engaged demand and qualified demand.
Awesome. And let me ask also, I guess a question for Allison is, what are your thoughts around managing change management internally? So we had somebody ask if you could give some guidance for them about how to handle that piece of it. I think to your point about the balancing and prioritizing the different components, it's not just about buying technology, but really about the change management as well.
Yeah, it's true. Good question. I think the best piece of advice I have is to really try to get to the root of the resistance. So a lot of times we'll have these kind of internal, sometimes political pieces of dialogue around change management because we're pursuing an initiative and somebody's resisting it. And we're so focused on the facts and we're so focused on this is good for the company, how could you possibly resist it, that we might be missing some sort of low-hanging fruit that is keeping this person from becoming on board with it. Sometimes that's a function of incentives. They're just incented in a different way, and that puts that whole structure in jeopardy, depending on what your initiative is. Sometimes an increase in transparency, which is generally the outcome of a good analytics project, is really a big risk for people in certain roles or for people who aren't so confident about what's under the hood, so to speak, about the work that they're doing or the results that they're having. So I think getting to that, what's really the source of the frustration here and dealing with that is really important. But on the assumption that something like that's not happening, I think there's a need to really stick to the facts. So everybody kind of, when they resist something, they'll tell a story of why it's not a good idea, or, you're telling me that's the target market, but in my experience, I sell to people like this, and really kind of teasing those out and saying, okay, that sounds like an anecdote, or, that sounds like a good story. Let's really dig into that. And finding the facts that surround it, and just sort of sticking to the facts rather than allowing the organization to make decisions based on anecdotes and stories. Mm-hmm. And I think the last thing I would say is to sort of be your own PR department, to really think about what it means to celebrate the small wins against, well set expectations that say we said we were going to do this, right, in that goal phase, and we did do this. And not kind of say, oh, the organization will understand that this was a win, but to really take charge of that communication strategy and then make sure the organization sees that this is a win and it has real results.
I think that's awesome. Hector, I'd actually extend the question to you as well. Genesys was obviously recognized as an ROI Award winner for alignment and for your effectiveness around these things. Did you have any internal hurdles in terms of that alignment, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. I mean, there's always challenges, right? When you're trying to implement something this dramatic, and it's a big change not only for marketing operations, it's a big change for marketing, and it's a big change for sales as well. So we got some people were not really buying into the whole setup, not really buying into the whole set of rules that we had created. So I think the way you overcome this is you need to hear what, some of the opinions, some of the ideas, and see how we can use some of those ideas, which could be very valid and very useful, into what you have built. And it's not an easy exercise, like to hear someone, and then how do I use that thought into what we have built already. So it takes it takes hearing for what people are saying, also adjusting to what you have built based on the feedback, but also being very persistent, going after, connecting with the teams many times, looking at the rules. And specifically for our interaction with sales, I think one of the key things on our alignment was to connect on, what the TAM was. And, we created that first file, we created that, and then we started sharing with the different teams in sales to get their feedback. Do you feel that this is the right approach? Do you think the segmentation is correct? Should we make some cuts here? Should we use some other data to make this more robust? And that really helped, making them part of the process. really help in getting that alignment and making this effective.
Awesome. We have two more questions in the queue already. One for Allison, and then I actually have one for both of you. How many segments or hyper segments do you recommend a business target for ABM? So I think, we see this with customers too, right? How many models is too many? How many segments is too many? How do you approach that with your clients, and how would you recommend the folks on the line do that?
The best rule of thumb is to segment just as much as you can, but this is where we come back to balance and alignment. So the most important thing, I think, is that the segments are made from data that people care about. So I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure that you'd agree, I'm targeted as someone who works at a high-tech firm in the Northeast geography that has, something like some number of employees. So there I am. So I'm in this kind of segment, and it doesn't really result in anything that means anything to me. It results in pretty generic one-size-fits-all messaging. But if I am part of a segment that's interested in a specific topic, and more granularly as a student of a particular topic, or someone potentially in a buy cycle of a particular topic, then you've created a segment that will help you figure out what to say to me and when, and develop content for me. So I would say a limited amount of segments. I'm going to say 3 to 4, and you guys can definitely step into that because it's always a bit subjective. But in that 3 to 4, as long as they really are segments that allow you to look at it and say, I've got a pretty good idea of what these people really need from me and what keeps them up at night, what's helpful to them, and what's just in their way, those are the guidelines I would provide.
That's awesome. And then a question for both of you from one of our attendees also. Can you give some examples of signals of churn or data sources in lead scoring models, just to help them understand a little bit more about what goes into these in particular? And Allison, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I think there are, in every category of behavior that I showed on that second to last slide, there are elements of some behaviors that might indicate churn. So I'm just going to brainstorm a few of them. Certainly decreased usage is a classic, so I'll start with that. Another classic is departure of a key contact. So again, when that contract signer has signed, or that key user or the key champion sort of departs to go to another company, classic signal of potential churn. But some of the ones that I think are becoming more popular now. So things like the access to third-party content consumption and web searches. People who are using your product but still are showing signs on the web of interest in that topic and buy signals on that topic, definitely a clear signal that they're not getting what they need from you potentially. So content consumption on the same topic, certainly research on competitors are clear signals. If you're running things like satisfaction scores or even satisfaction post-call, any indicator of poor satisfaction should be included in that model as well. I think there's also something to be said for trend-wise what things look like. So how often is a happy client sort of contacted by your firm? So how often does a salesperson or account manager reach out just to say, how are you doing? Have you seen this feature? Or whatnot, whatever your classic, newsletter send is, versus someone who, how would you be able to tell that someone has sort of gone dark, right? Has started to kind of ignore you or are not engaged with you, setting up some benchmarks so that that would be signaled, and look for things like spikes in service calls, right? That could certainly be indicative of interest in a feature that someone hasn't used before and could be a good thing, but it's definitely should be part of the model so that that spike or dip causes some action from you.
I couldn't agree more. I think those are all awesome.
Yeah.
Hector, we have just a minute left. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that was a great response, actually. I really thank you, Allison. I was thinking about when we're building our model for churn, like what things I would add. And I mean, this is looking at internal engagement, looking at third-party intent, signals where they're looking at a competitor. Also, the NPS surveys. This is something that we want to incorporate into the new models that we're building. So this was a great response. I think when you're building those models, I think those are key things. I think from the previous questions around segmentation, I think what we have done is we have built the ability for teams to segment accounts in different ways. And sometimes you're going to be going after a very discrete number of accounts, let's say 10 accounts, and you want to have the tools to show, what are the best accounts, the more likely to convert and progress based on different, different insights or data rules. So we allow for that, but at the same time, we also have created a process in which we have specific segments that we use for automated terminus campaigns, and that is, we have about 20-30 segments. Now, when you're talking about segmentation using predictive analytics and building models for specific segments, I think, and this is something I explain in my presentation, I mean, you would want to go as deep as you can, but the reality is sometimes you don't have enough data, especially in B2B, and you need to decide what aggregation you need to do that makes sense in terms of the consistent behavior across segments and regions. So I think that's something to consider as well.
Love it.
Awesome. I hate to do this because I feel like we could continue this conversation for so much longer. We are at the bottom of the hour, so I want to make sure to honor folks' rest of the day priorities. Thank you so much, Hector. Thank you so much, Allison, for being here with us. I know we couldn't get to all of the Q&A, but I hope that what we did put together was valuable for those on the line. We'll certainly be happy to follow up later, and we'll make sure that the folks that attended know, who we are and who the speakers are, so you can follow up additionally if you have anything else. So my gratitude to you. Thank you for being on this journey with us, and looking forward to more magic in the future.
Thank you all.
Thank you.